Hello. On behalf of the UK Government's UK Trade and Investment Department and Pure London, thank you for watching this special panel discussing the role and importance of British fashion, accessories and footwear. And a special thank you to the London College of Fashion for hosting this panel. And my name is McGarrigle. I'm the chairman of the World Retail Congress, and it's my pleasure to be able to chair this panel discussion today. And with me I've got a panel of experts drawn from right across the industry, encompassing design, retail and retail marketing, discussing, as I say, the importance of British fashion. And this panel has been brought together by UK Trade and Investment as part of their ongoing initiative to support great British companies. And it's the intention of UKTI and Pure London to really focus on showcasing the very best of British design, fashion and accessories. As I say, joining me today we have the perfect panel to discuss and cover all of the key questions around British fashion. And to begin our discussion, I'd like to invite each of our panellists just to very briefly introduce themselves. So Meg, would you like to start?
Hi, my name is Meg Lustman and I'm the Fashion Director at John Lewis.
And I'm Chitra Buckley and I'm the course leader for MA Fashion Entrepreneurship here at London College of Fashion.
I'm Wright and I'm the owner of an independent retail business selling designer fashion in Derbyshire. We have 2 boutiques and an online operation.
And I'm Lauretta Roberts. I'm the Director of Brand Extensions at Trend and Style Forecaster, WGSN.
Hello, I'm Stella Hartley. I'm an independent marketing consultant specialising in retail and fashion.
Okay, well, thank you very much and welcome. And really to start us off, as I say, obviously our discussion is around British fashion, and to begin I'd really like to get your thoughts on what we as a panel think being British means in the context of fashion, footwear and accessories, because it's interesting as part of the work we've done with UKTI talking to international retailers. There's a variance of views, and it goes from the emphasis on the heritage of British manufacturing through to what's described as the quirkiness, the street fashion and the high fashion end at the other end of the spectrum. But obviously really keen to get your views on what you think it means. And maybe Meg, if you would start with your thoughts.
For me, fashion in the UK is very much driven by pace, by creativity, by innovation, and innovation not only in what we do, but also how we do it. I think we're really world-class in terms of our omni-channel proposition, how we integrate online, offline, how we manage shops, how we run shops. So I think that there's a lot of excitement and a lot of creativity really that comes through in British retail, British fashion.
Yes.
Yes, I would actually agree with that wholeheartedly. I think what we're seeing in the UK retail-wise is absolutely astounding in terms of their flexibility, in terms of their sort of ability to respond to the market's change. You know, the changes in the market and that sort of rapidity and being really offering a whole service to the consumer. Mm.
For me, one of the things that struck me when I thought about the question was really the broad spectrum that's represented in the UK fashion industry. It ranges from, you know, you've got big companies with great reputations internationally that are leading their field, you know, the likes of Burberry, Mulberry, you know, designers like Stella McCartney and so on. But then it also goes to another extreme, and you've got great entrepreneurship, and you've got a hotbed of talent and you know, great things going on at a very micro level, and you know, the way the two meld and can develop, I just find fascinating.
I mean, I was thinking the same thing. I considered this question a lot, and I can't put my finger on one thing that defines British fashion because so many things do, and I think that's what makes us the most exciting country globally. London's the most exciting fashion capital at the moment, and it's to do with the fact that we have incredible retailers who move at an incredible pace. E-tail was born here, you know, we were the first to really adopt that. We have incredibly vibrant street fashion. Our high street's one of the best in the world. And then at the high end, we do have these incredibly, and I think it's thanks to organisations like the London College of Fashion and the design schools, we've got the best fashion designers, the most creative, the most imaginative fashion designers. I think what's changed for me a bit in the last sort of decade, 5 years or so, is that at that high end it's become much more, I hesitate to use this word, but I mean it in a good way, it has become much more commercial. I think we used to be the place people came to look for quirky stuff and then go and spend the money in Milan or Paris, but they actually come here now to get creative fashion and buy it, and that's moved on now. I think we're much more commercial force in fashion globally than we once were as well.
I mean, I pretty much agree with what everybody else has said, but I mean, for me personally, I think it's about having really strong brands. That's what makes Britain quite unique in terms of its fashion proposition. And I think we've got brands that are capable of completely reinventing themselves as well. We're looking at some of the retail brands that you see around today. Some of them were founded in the 60s and just gone on to reinvent themselves over and over again to remain just as topical and as current as they were when they first started. So I think that our ability to produce really strong brands with longevity is what makes us really different.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Lauretta, you were saying this Britishness represents a range of looks, so you can't pin it down, but do you think there is a sort of handwriting to Britishness? Can you, in all your experience looking at fashion from around the world, all of you really, do you say you have an instinctive sense of, yeah, that's got something that's...
To a degree, yeah. I mean, I think when I think of Milan, I just think of high gloss. There's a real Milanese look to it, and there's a real identity in New York. You know, you think Donna Karan and Calvin Klein, and it's very pared down and very minimalist. Whereas London, I suppose it is very modern and very creative. So I guess all of the sort of impulses around colour and silhouette and all that, it all comes from London because, I don't know, I suppose our customer is just more open-minded and interested in trying new things. And I do think, and I'll reiterate that, I think because we have the design schools here that give these designers the freedom to express themselves, that comes out on our catwalks. But like I say, I think in much more wearable and commercial ways now. You know, buyers used to come to London almost to sort of pat us on the head and say, oh, well done, that's very quirky, and off they go somewhere else and spend all their budget. And they come here now and they buy our brands, and it's okay for our brands to be based here, which I think is really, really nice as well. It used to be, once our designers got successful, they'd have to go off to New York or Milan or Paris to really, really forge strong careers. Well, they can do it here now. You know, it's a real commercial centre globally. But I can't say to you, it's that minimalist look, because we have got that as well. We've got this crazy eccentricity. Sportswear's huge here, you know, and I can't say one thing. It's not tweed. It's all of these things. Yeah.
But isn't that what makes it special?
That is what makes it special.
It's constantly changing. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there is an element of the heritage there, though. You know, the tailoring skills, the pattern cutting that, you know, that go back centuries. And I think there is a certain style that people would recognise about Britishness there. Yeah. You know, some of that is the eccentricity and the quirkiness. Yeah, I agree. You know.
And it's also the quality, I think. You know, you talked about Savile Row, well, tailoring, Savile Row. I mean, it's about quality. And then we've also got Church's shoes and a new brand, or newish brand, that we've come into contact with, Churchby. Nice plug, but they are very much based on heritage and set up from Cumbria, and work with, you know, work on particular types of wools and particular types of tweed. So even though it's new and experimental, it's still tapping into the heritage vibe, really.
But then you also have the high street, which is just such a fast-changing proposition, and you know, to Stella's point, brands that have been around for a very long time, much older than their customers, and they keep, you know, the pace going and the changes going. And I think it would be difficult to stereotype them as being, you know, something. But so I think that's the fascinating thing, isn't it? The gamut of what British fashion means. It really means all sorts of things.
Yes. Yeah. So if that's what we think, Lauretta, I wanted to turn to you in your role, particularly at WGSN. You've travelled the world and you cover the shows and your team covers the shows. What's the converse of what we've just been discussing? How do you see people overseas viewing British fashion?
Viewing our brands now? I mean, I think it's definitely changed. I touched on it a moment ago. I do think, you know, 5-10 years ago, and I'm talking now in sort of London Fashion Week terms, really, buyers coming here to buy our designs. I think sometimes they'd skip London Fashion Week, or they'd come every other season or once every few, just to check out what the crazy kids were doing, because we had quite a lot of avant-gardist designers. And really, when they wanted to be taken seriously, they would have to go to Paris and they would have to go to New York or wherever was the most appropriate location for their aesthetic. Whereas now, for instance, all the big American buyers from Saks, Barney's, Bloom, they wouldn't miss London Fashion Week now, and they're coming here now. What I think is really, really encouraging as well is the success of London Collections Men as well. Really, and that, because we've got that heritage of Savile Row, because we've got that sort of street credibility in fashion as well, the British Fashion Council's been able to pull that off as well. So the buyers do come here to spend money now. They don't just come here just to see the craziness that goes on. I mean, they come here for that too, but they're spending money on it, and our brands have great appeal in their department stores. And as well, I think Meg's probably better talk to this than I am, but in the past, our more high street brands had a bit of trouble perhaps translating their proposition internationally, but actually now we're starting to see our high street brands being able, Topshop being one example, being able to take that British aesthetic or their approach and export it and do really well in Europe and in America and things like that. So we really are starting to become a really strong commercial centre for fashion, both high-end creative fashion and fast commercial fashion, I think.
So we're here in the London College of Fashion and talking about design and British design. Is this something you teach in terms of how that look is, or is this coming naturally from the students that come through here? Are you conscious of this British look when you're...
There is. At London College of Fashion, we don't teach a house style. The students that we take on to the master's courses and undergraduates as well tend to be about 50% international and 50% home and EU. So there's a wide variety of cultural backgrounds and differences and aesthetics that come into the college. But we do practical workshops, and we do look at British manufacturing, and we do work with traditional British manufacturers. So there is that knowledge and awareness, but we don't actually teach a house style.
So the quite high number of international students, and are they coming here because they want to immerse themselves in that being part of the British fashion and design sector, would you say? Absolutely,
and that's a huge selling point really for us, in the sense that we're based in London, and London is such a great centre. Just done a round of interviews, and that always comes up as a number one sort of criteria for coming to the college, as well as everything else, our links with industry as well. But I think the students really appreciate the diversity of style that they see in the street, and the fact that it's very experimental, that they can visit markets and they'll see fantastic fashion, say Spitalfields, as well as on the sort of upper market streets. So I think that diversity is really what attracts them.
And you look after and teach the Fashion Entrepreneur course here, so can you tell me a little bit about that? And does that suggest, and are you seeing an increase in students leaving here who want to set up their own businesses and brands in fashion?
Absolutely. I mean, again, on the Masters, we take on a high percentage of international students. Most of them want to set up their own businesses at some point, maybe immediately afterwards or a bit further into the future. We're also launching another course which is actually directly geared to people who've actually just set up their own businesses and maybe struggling, and it's going to be part-time, and it's credit-based, so they can do sort of one module followed by another to literally set up their own business, and they'll be mentored by industry, and they'll be supported through all the stages of developing a brand and getting the business going. Yeah, and then that's because there was a need to do that. Absolutely.
So are the barriers for entry for new businesses higher or easier than they've been, would you say?
Well, Britain is probably about one of the best places to set up a new business in fashion, and it's very new business friendly, which is great. And so we also have entrepreneurship visas as well, which we allocate to students. So if they want to set up here but they're not actually UK national, they can do that also. So I think the attractiveness of Britain as a commercial centre is quite strong.
So Stella, I want to turn to you now. We've talked about design, but Britain has a great reputation for creating fashion brands, and you've been involved with a number over the years. And I just wondered what your thoughts were and why, if you agree that we are successful at creating fashion brands, and why you think that is.
I think it's to do with the great sort of combination of the heritage and the authenticity of our sort of origins in fashion, as we've alluded to in terms of Savile Row, etc., and the real swinging brands back to the 60s. And I think it's to do with combining that heritage and that authenticity with a very current level of coolness, with today's fashion. So I think that's what makes our brands quite distinctive. And I think that there are a lot of brands that offer not only a fashion or an interpretation of fashion, but also offer an opportunity to buy into a complete sort of lifestyle or make an expression of your own personality through them. And I think that's quite interesting. There are brands that are slightly irreverent, like White Stuff, for example, and there are brands that talk about a lot of self-expression and freedom and adventure, such as Joe Brown's, for example. So they have their own individual identity, but they're also offering a form of fashion. And if you look at the product in jewels, for example, you wouldn't say that was high fashion, but it's a version of fashion to a customer that wants to buy into that kind of country lifestyle. And it's a kind of rural look that's a bit kind of funked up for an urban society. So I think that it's really interesting that brands not only offer a level of fashionability, but they offer a level of personality as well. And for me, that's what branding is all about.
And what's driving it? Obviously, people understand product, but I mean, marketing is obviously that's what brands are, live or die by, reaching the market. And marketing is very much the area that you're always been immersed in. I mean, how important a part do you see marketing playing in building these brands?
Well, obviously, I think it's very important being a marketer. But I think I've noticed a change, actually. I think now I think people start by thinking about the marketing. Whereas I think in the past, people started with a great product concept and then thought, well, how are we going to market this? And now I think that marketing has come right back to the beginning of the equation and people are actually thinking about the customer and the brand at the same time as they're actually developing a product aesthetic and a design. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that's why, we are at the forefront of fashion as a nation, because we harness the creativity of the marketing, which also has embraced all the new technology, together with the strength of the design or a founder's aspiration and vision. So by harnessing those things together, I think marketing plays a really important role.
Would everyone else agree? I mean, Meg, obviously you've been involved with many high street brands. I mean, what would you see as the ingredient for success of some of the brands that
I think there has to be something about the integrity of how you deliver it. So to the point that Stella's making, knowing what you stand for and making sure that every part of your your customer journey, aligns against what it is you stand for. Because I think that's where businesses will be businesses as opposed to brands, and therefore will probably not last for very long. Is if they don't provide that consistency, because it's a terribly competitive high street. I mean, it's a very expensive high street, and therefore we all have to be very, very good at driving sales densities, margin, etc. So the things that I think make some brands stand out against others are the fact that they are just ruthlessly consistent in their execution, according to what the template or the brand vision is.
It's about creating standout and this kind of emotional engagement with the customer. If you can do that and sort of cut through almost the practicalities of the product, but you get into this emotional level, I think that's really strong. And I think that a lot of our brands have achieved that.
People that don't know about fashion are always surprised at how disciplined and controlled and planned it is. And I think that's always kind of people, oh, do you do that? So I think that's always quite a wake up to them, that they realise there's some really great thinking and great planning. And great execution that goes into it, and we're quite tough on ourselves.
It's interesting, Stella, you mentioned that being focused in terms of marketing, focused on the customer. I think Lauretta early on, you mentioned about what makes British, particularly street style. It's driven by the customer, what the British consumer wants, and that's quite an interesting point. I think.
I mean, I think what we're finding more and more. Obviously, on WGSN we've been covering street style since we began. 15 years ago, we were one of the first people to get out there, so take pictures of people on the street and saying this is what they're wearing, this is what they want, give it to them. But I think what brands are doing much more cleverly now, we talk about marketing, is they're bringing their customer into their sort of marketing conversations and putting the customer at the centre of that. I mean, I think a great example of it, it's not a British brand sadly, but I can just think it's on top of my head, is somebody like Nike. They have their fandom base where they get people to just wear their shoes, tell them what they like, what they don't like, and that's how they develop their product, and that's how they learn how to market to that customer. They really do engage with the customer now, and there are lots of brands that do that, put that customer at the centre, and when they're designing their stores, they think about putting the customer at the centre. So we're seeing that sort of balance of power shift now towards the person on the street. They can have a much more influential role in how a brand behaves and speaks to them than ever they did before, and clever brands are seeing that as a great opportunity, I think.
Of course, technology, I suppose, has transformed that, because the medium to get that feedback, the social media or whatever, instant feedback that's there.
Yeah. But I mean, people like ASOS, they've got a customer panel, they've just set that up, and people signed up for it on social media, and they come in and talk to them, and they're so clever, aren't they? I mean, but they've got those people on the street actually in their offices telling them what they want and what's going on out there. It's important.
Yeah. So Meg, on that point, what feeds into the buying decisions that your team are making? I mean, obviously working for a large retailer with obviously a large product mix, but I wonder how important Britishness is to the mix that you buy or your team is buying.
I think that in a department store you have to have a very broad brand mix that both she recognises, and so she comes in knowing that she'll find the brands she loves. Then I think the trick is, how do you bring in new brands? How do you create new brands? How do you give new how do you make sure that you've got enough interest and enough excitement and enough, gosh, that's new, that makes you stand out compared to your other competitors, and that really is the challenge for us. I don't think we start off with a strategy about we must buy British, but by definition we do buy British because it both meets the criteria of brands I know and brands I trust, as well as brands that surprise and interest me. So at all ends of the spectrum, we're proud to be buying British because they do it so well.
Yeah. And what are the sort of key considerations over the last few years? Because obviously we've been through some tough economic times, and so the demands and needs of your customers have changed too. How has that been reflected in?
I think she's much more aware of value. So if you're asking her to pay a price that's at a premium to the discounter, she needs to know that it's worth it. She's very, very savvy, and she's not a fool. She's got so much choice, and she'll just make sure that she's getting what she wants. And she's not scared of price. So I think when customers see something that they think is beautiful, and they've got the detail or the quality or the fit, they'll absolutely pay for it. But she's not going to pay for something that's substandard. So I think 10 years ago maybe longer, it didn't matter as much, but now she's a very discerning customer.
So Anne, I was going to sort of pick up and ask what your view on that was. I mean, just to also say, because you represent thousands of independent retailers really around the country, and you didn't say in your introduction, but Young Ideas, your business is the Independent Retailer of the Year, so deserved congratulations on that. But just independent retailers, just as consumers in the UK, have had a tough time in the last few years, and you've got a successful business now, but I know it's not been easy as it has for hundreds of others. So just wondered how you approach retailing in today's climate and what you look for, particularly in terms of British product. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I mean, first and foremost for us, what's so important is understanding our customer and what they're looking for. And I think the point that Meg made there is very valid for us in terms of perception of quality and value for money. It's about people will, not perhaps consciously, but almost think of pound per wear, in terms of if something works for them. And in terms of British designers, I mean, above all else, we're looking for, in everything that we buy, we're looking for, great products, great design, originality, and things that are going to stand out and appeal to our customers, and that quality and heritage comes into it. But also from a business perspective, I guess not so much from a consumer's perspective, but what British suppliers have offered us, rather than the bigger international conglomerates, is greater flexibility, that help to support a smaller retail business. You know, flexibility on lead times, flexibility on payment terms, flexibility on minimum order requirements. All that makes a huge difference to a small business and to survival through times of recession. So that's been important to us. And I mean, we as a business, we sell, about 40 different, very much like John Lewis, a range of different brands and a range of international brands. But one thing I'm really proud of, we have, a top 3 that are really equal, and one's Italian, one's American, but the other is British. Very proud of that, and and it plug for Paul Smith, but absolutely fantastic product, and he's doing a great job, and very much got Britishness is at the heart of the offer. Yeah.
And you've just come, I guess, to the end of your current buying cycle for next season. And have you approached it with more confidence? And are you feeling more confidence in the market in terms of the companies and brands that you've been speaking to?
Yes, but it's still cautious, and everybody is still working very hard to get it right. I mean, another British brand that we're just going to be taking on as a new brand this season for us is a good example is Smedley, which great example of a very traditional brand that goes back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, got great quality product, a great techniques, skills, knowledge in their business. But I have to say I would have looked at that business as a little bit staid a few years ago, but they're doing a great job of reinventing themselves, becoming much more contemporary, more relevant, tapping into that heritage, but making it relevant for today's consumer. And that's given us a reason to buy into to their offer this season.
I'm going to ask about value. We've already touched on it, but Smedley is, you wouldn't say that's a value in terms of price, but it's I guess it's what it delivers to the customer.
Absolutely. The longevity of products and the quality, the cut, the way it's put together. Yeah.
But what does the panel think about that wider question of value? Because we've come through the economic downturn with sort of the value retailers and value brands being much talked about, but how do you think it affects the consumer mindset more generally in terms of what is value?
I think it's the new normal, really. It's absolutely what it has to be. Everyone's much more aware now of getting a good deal or getting something that offers good wear, or the number of times you wear something, or whether it's clothes or shoes or whatever. So I think it is the new normal. People just expect to be able to get a good investment when they spend their money.
But there also that point Meg made about being savvy and very discerning. Yeah. It can be value for money at £10-15, or it can be value for money at £1,000. Yeah. It's relative, isn't it? And I think the consumer is quite sophisticated and is able to make that distinction now.
Yeah, some people will do pay £1,000 for a handbag, and they're quite happy to do that, but you have to understand what it is you're buying. There has to be the design and quality content within that product for you to part with that cash. But the value market as we define it in our world, in the sort of journalistic world, we're talking Primark there, or we're talking I don't know, Matalan or something like that. That has been incredibly transformative and a bit scary actually, that customers expect to pay so little for certain items, and because they've got the internet and their mobiles at their fingertips, they can just see, white t-shirts are £2 cheaper here, I'm going to go here, and so that becomes a bit of a nightmare, frankly, if you're a retailer, because you really do have to get your prices right to the last 50p or something, because customers will punish you for it if you don't. But I do think, and it's not just in fashion, it's in food and furniture and other markets that we look at as well. People are stopping to think about what's behind that price, and they worry about the ethics of of the manufacturing process. They worry about, maybe, is it great quality, because you can spend £5 on something, but if you wear it once, that's quite expensive actually. You can spend £50 on something that you wear 100 times, and that's much better value. So I think there's a little bit of a more thoughtful purchase coming to the forefront a bit at the moment. But I don't want to be sniffy about it, because I do think that for some people that genuinely is what they can afford. We've been in really, really tough times, and they've got kids to dress for school, and they're on very, very squeezed, budgets. And I think if they go to Primark and they can clothe their family, get their school uniforms, then absolutely they should do that. I mean, I don't want to be snobbish about it, because I think that they're serving a customer that, you know, it's valid, the reasons that they're going there. So
absolutely, but I think also there's the mindset's beginning to change. I mean, a lot of our students in their projects that they're developing, they're looking at sustainable materials and sustainable processes, and there's also this idea that they can't afford to buy things that are not expensive because of that throwaway factor, that actually it ends up being more value for money, cheaper in the end, by buying something that's a bit more expensive, that
just to be that more considered about what you buy better and buy less, maybe, you know, that sort of thing.
It's interesting, we've talked a lot about British design, but we hear a lot about a renaissance in British manufacturing to match the design. I mean, what's the experience of the panel in terms of customer demand, or people asking about that, or practically speaking, you know, are you seeing that there is a renaissance in British manufacturing, and at the London College of Fashion you are, you know, very much promoting that, but just interested in your views on that. I don't know who wants to.
Absolutely. Well, the Centre for Fashion Enterprise, which is part of London College of Fashion, is working. They found that their designers working here actually found it quite difficult to start developing their ranges, so hence the DISC, which is Design Innovation Centre. It supports the development of manufacturing, and so we're seeing a lot more specialist manufacturers, manufacturers who are, you know, building up on scaling up, and we recently had a designer in last week who's actually set up a manufacturing company in Wimbledon. So, you know, we're seeing it more and more, small scale, but then scaling up bigger and bigger, which is great. It's really exciting.
Yeah. And Anne, you were saying, you know, Stalking Smedley, is that part of the appeal too? That it's without doubt a British brand in all senses. You know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously we're a business that's based in Derbyshire, and, you know, Smedley comes from there, so certainly there is, you know, an affinity there. And again, with Paul Smith, you know, coming from Nottingham, you know, and very much London oriented. Yeah, there's a recognition of that, and it does have an appeal.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Meg, I wanted to sort of change the subject a little. I mean, you've been associated over your career with many brands that have gone on to become international brands. So just sort of thinking about your working with international buyers and international partners, you know, what would you say are the key lessons you took away from that experience, and how hard or easy is it for British brands to go international? What would you recommend that they take on board and learn?
My experience is that the more high street in terms of fashionability and price, the more difficult it was to travel successfully, because the more you needed to change your model, you needed to change your ways of working to be successful internationally. So I think, you know, we're so focused on driving margin, driving profitability in our market that there's very little room for error. And when you go abroad, you're going to make more mistakes than you're used to, because it's a new market, a customer that doesn't know you. And I think that can be difficult for businesses that really micromanage in the way that high street brands do. So in my experience, it was more difficult, say, to export a warehouse than it was a Karen Millen. However, at the other end, a Karen Millen that has a much, you know, a very defined aesthetic about it, we found that travelled really easily. So I think it really is, it's horses for courses, and it's whether or not you have a brand whose aesthetic will really be appealing globally, and you can only decide that when you've got the brand in front of you, and you've obviously got to be very selective about which markets you go to, and you usually find that the markets you want to go to are not as developed as you want them to be. So it's a game, it really is a game, but I'd say that it's more strategic than most British retailers want to be, and that's why it's so difficult, and that's why we tend to go the franchise route rather than doing it ourselves. Whereas you look at Inditex, you look at the H&M group, they are far more strategic. They are prepared to lose money, they are prepared to take their time, learn, you know, react, develop in a completely different way, and I think that's why they travel much better than we do.
Yes. Stella, do you have a view on that?
Well, not other than the sort of marketing view that, you know, you've just got to understand your customer. That's the critical thing, and we can't assume that a customer in a different country is going to react exactly the same way as a British customer. You know, there are different dynamics and different issues and different philosophies in different countries. So I think you've just got to make sure that you do your research thoroughly and understand, you know, who you're targeting and is that customer going to be receptive, and what might you need to do to your proposition and your product offer in order to appeal more to that customer.
Lauretta, in your years going to sort of Pure and talking to international buyers and going to overseas shows where British brands were there, was there any common view you used to hear from international fashion buyers about British brands and the things that they liked, or maybe disliked, but maybe more the liked?
I mean, you know, in terms of the brands, I just think things have got an awful lot more professional with British brands. You know, I think we had quite a lot of small brands that maybe if you're a big international buyer and you're coming in to buy it, you're maybe not really going to get the volumes you want and the fit that you want, and the delivery wasn't quite what you expected when you got it. So there was an element, particularly with some of our more creative designers, of them being a bit wary and, you know, thinking, well, it's a bit of a risk. Whereas now it is much more professional and much more reliable. There would always be, you know, if you look at markets like Scandinavia and those big Danish brands have this massive, you know, sort of mid-noughties influx of all these sort of Scandinavian brands. They were so well geared up for export because they knew their own market was tiny. So they absolutely had to be super professional. They had to get their fit right, get their quality right, get their deliveries right. They really focused on that, and that's why they were so tremendously popular with buyers, because they were reliable and they were well priced, you know. And now I think a lot of the British brands are getting their acts together. They're the smaller ones where they are much more reliable, much more, you know, well priced, etc., so that people can depend upon them. I think previously there was a slight risk factor with some British brands. I'm not talking about the big mega brands, but more, you know, more in that sort of mid-market space. Yeah, and I do think also, exactly, I think things like that, and I think at the designer end, the British Fashion Council with all these fashion funds that they do has really, really been very helpful in that regard as well. But I think we've always had a strong reputation for interesting design, for sure. It's just about getting that, I don't know, getting the business side of it right as well. Yeah.
I think that's pretty much coming to the end of our discussion, and just to wrap it up, I wondered if I could ask each of you in turn, what would you say to international buyers about why they should take a fresh look at British fashion and accessories and footwear? I don't know who would like to start. Stella, would you like to?
Because I think you've got to take a fresh look, because it's basically a very dynamic market. It's constantly changing and it's very forward-thinking and futuristic, and you know, you've just got to keep looking at it and keeping abreast of all the developments that are going on. It's a very exciting market, so that's why I think people should look afresh at it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more, really. It's just, for me, I'm completely biased, I'm sitting here in London, but it is just the most interesting place to come and look at fashion right now, and we're getting it right, you know, pricing it properly, making it properly, you know, being reliable. They should definitely come and take a fresh look if they're not already here.
Absolutely. I mean, they're sort of simply missing out if they don't. It is so vibrant here. You've only got to look at the number of tourists and the attraction of foreign buyers into London. It's phenomenal. And if there's all that demand and people prepared to travel, well, then you should look at it, you know, for supply into their home markets. There's, you know, huge demand there, I think.
Absolutely, and I think in terms of new designers, we've probably got the most new designers developing in London than anywhere else in the world. So there's, I think, spoilt for choice is probably something you can say.
I think online has changed everything as well. I think you look at ASOS and how they've grown an enormous business online. What that's telling, that must be telling international buyers, is that there's an international market, and there are customers that have a huge appetite for UK brands. So if they're ignoring it, I would say they're doing so at their peril, because they're allowing brands like ASOS and others to export and export very successfully, whereas they could be taking some of that themselves.
Great. Well, as I say, we have run out of time, so I just really wanted to thank you on behalf of UKTI and Pure London. So thank you, Stella, Lauretta, and Chitra, and Meg, for your input. And thank you very much indeed for watching this discussion. We hope you enjoyed it. We started off by asking what is British fashion represent, and there is no simple, clear answer, which I think is really very much part of the appeal of this really exciting market. So once again, on behalf of UKTI and Pure London, thank you for watching. We hope to welcome you to London in the very near future to see for yourselves the very best of British. Thank you very much.